Okay, welcome to the Enterprise Excellence Network webinar series. Today we are joined with Christoph Rosser, and today Christoph will be giving an executive overview on the topic of quantitative and qualitative comparisons of the Japanese automotive industry. Just before we go into the webinar, just a bit about us. For those, I can see some familiar names, but for those who don't know us, we are an arena for senior lean leaders focused in Europe, founded by Professor Peter Hines. The network includes workshops, which were before COVID held at best practice award-winning host sites. And since then, we've translated those virtually. We hope to get back to normality probably next year, it's looking like now. But if you'd like to find out more about us and who we are, you can visit our website, which will be in an email sent to you at the end, or you can email myself. So just a bit about today. We'll have a 30-minute presentation by Christoph and then followed by a dedicated Q&A session. So feel free to ask your questions using the questions tab for Christoph then. Okay, I'll just hand over to Professor Peter Hines just to say a few more words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma, and welcome everyone, whether it's good morning, good afternoon, or good night, whatever time of day it is with you. It's our pleasure to welcome you again to one of our Enterprise Excellence Network sessions. This is about number 23, 24, something like that. And I'm very pleased to welcome Christoph Rosser, who I've taken the opportunity to have a few chats with, and we've been wanting to sort of talk to each other for some time, having followed some of his blog messages. And as Emma said, we will be taking I suppose a virtual historical tour of Japan, following some of the research that Christoph has done, going around some of the major Japanese automakers. So with that, I'll hand over to Christoph and we'll run the session. And as Emma said, if you'd like to fill in the questions, the chat area, any questions you have, you can fill them in during the talk. We'll let Christoph go through his whole session, and then I'll pose the questions on your behalf at the end of the session. So with that, hand over to you, Christoph.
Thank you very much, and welcome to my presentation about the grand tour of Japanese automotive, where I was able to visit all 7 major car makers in Japan and have a look at their plans, and not only qualitatively but also quantitatively compare how well they are performing, which to me had some quite interesting surprises. But before that, I would like to give a little bit of introduction about Japanese working culture in general. And I always in between have those little eye candies of Japan. For example, the picture you see here is during the autumn when the foliage turns color in Kyoto. Picture I took myself. So every now and then I have those little eye candies. A little bit about me first. My name is Chris Rosser. And my claim to fame, amongst other things, is that I worked for Toyota for 5 years in Japan and was doing research on supply chains, bottlenecks, and also the Toyota production system. And that's where I actually learned how lean works, how to do the Toyota production system. And that's also where I started my love for Japan. After that, I spent a couple of years with McKinsey & Company, couple years at Bosch, also in both cases for lean and operational excellence, at Bosch also as a manager. And since about 8 years, I'm a professor at the Karlsruhe University of Applied Sciences. Maybe some of you know me through my blog, allaboutlean.com. I try to explain how lean works in a hopefully understandable way. I like writing. I've written a book about the history of manufacturing, and the book you see in the lower right is something you probably haven't seen before because it's still in the print-proof version. It's not yet available, but hopefully after Easter, my book on pull production will be hitting the shelves, where I go into great detail how pull production works, what to do, what not to do, Kanban and other things. But so much for the forward. Let's talk about Japan. I had the opportunity to spend 5 months in Japan in 2017 to 2018 at Keio University in Tokyo. And my host was Professor Masaru Nakano. And he also, no coincidence, happened to be my boss at Toyota. When I was working for Toyota, he was my laboratory manager. He hired me, he was in charge of me, and I consider him to be my mentor. And like me, he became a professor a little bit earlier than me, and I was able to do a sabbatical at his university. So I'm very happy to have him as a friend. So, Japan. As I said, before I go into the individual car companies, I would like to talk a little bit about the Japanese mindset towards manufacturing. And that's used in a Japanese word, monotsukuri, which means making things, creating things. And that in Japan has a much higher value than in the rest of the world. We Germans, we are proud of our engineering, and we do have some reputation for our engineering, but in terms of work ethics, we pale to the Japanese. They really, really pay attention, want to do the detail, and no matter what the people in Japan do, they want to become the best at what they're doing. Even if somebody is just emptying the trash cans, they want to become really, really good at emptying trash cans and trying to optimize it and improve it. And so monotsukuri is a very strong thing in Japan, much stronger than in the rest of the world. Originally, it was meant for craftsmen, for artisans, but the word is nowadays also used for industry in order to make industry jobs more interesting and more valuable. And industry also talks about monotsukuri, about the importance of making things. In that connection, I would like to give you a few examples with how monotsukuri works in Japan. And for example, you know probably some famous artists, famous painters or writers or musicians or sculptures, and kind of you probably know a few household names if I ask you about art. But do you know famous craftsmen, a famous potter or so? Probably not. But in Japan, they do have those. They have what they call living national treasures. And of course, some of those treasures are related to the arts, but they also have living national treasures for crafts. There is a living national treasure, Shoji Hamada, which is a potter. He is a famous potter. Albeit living would be the wrong word. He since then has passed away, so he's no longer living, but when he was alive, he was a living treasure. Or Mrs. Shimura Fukumi, she is a living national treasure for her work in textiles. And you can find similar ones for metal and woodworking and lacquerware. And I don't know about those kind of things in other countries, but in Japan, they have government designated living national treasures for people who excel at their craft. Or to give you another example, I saw this when I was in a flight within Japan. I was flying from Tokyo to Fukuoka in the south. So it was a domestic flight. It was mostly Japanese. I was one of the very few foreigners. And it was an older plane, so we didn't have our individual monitors in front of us, but only the big monitors at the end of the plane, kind of the same program for everybody. And in Britain or Germany or America, there would be some cartoons or maybe some travel blog or something like this, some as for entertainment, but not in Japan. The flight I was on, they had a documentary on how to make a shampoo bottle. And for 30 minutes, they went into great details what they did to optimize the shampoo bottle. They didn't talk about the shampoo. They only talked about the container. And it wasn't even a bottle, it was just a refill pack where you can refill your bottle. And for 30 minutes, they went on into great details about all the things to make those bottles better. They talked about origami, the Japanese art of paper folding, and how they applied this to fold the plastic foil so it can get completely flat and you can get all of the material out. Or that's the opening detail of the opening. If you look closely, you see in here it's a little bit tighter. So there's kind of a small ring, and that's designed so less shampoo gets stuck on the inside of the thread, and less shampoo gets wasted, more gets into the bottle. So on the right pictures, the ring in the back, that's kind of a tighter spot to optimize the use of the shampoo in the refill pack. Or you will see that the edges here are a little bit jagged, kind of a little bit like a gear, because in Japan there's something like a Jello drink, and so Jello drinks are in very similar foil packages. You have the foil package, you open it, and you just squeeze the Jello in your mouth and eat, drink, whatever it. To make it safer, they gave this shampoo bottle this gear-like shape, so little children don't mix it up. And if you put it in your mouth, you notice that that feels odd. It doesn't feel like the Jello drink, so the chances of little children mixing up the shampoo with the Jello drink is reduced. And for 30 minutes, they went into great detail about all the things they did to optimize this shampoo bottle. And I don't know about Britain that well, but in Germany, it's hard to imagine to have in the plane for 30 minutes, the program for everybody is the optimization of a shampoo bottle. That would be really, really weird. But in Japan, that is okay. Because in Japan, manufacturing is much more on the mind of the people and has a much higher value. This drive for perfection, it's very, very interesting. Or another example, the Toyota employee evaluation. I won't go through all of those points. You can find more about this on my blog. But Toyota has an evaluation of employees, like probably most companies in the world. And they grouped those, they have 20 points grouped in 2 groups. And one group, Gemba, also the shop floor, Kaizen, continuous improvement, quality. The first group is all about manufacturing. The second one, performance and behavior. But the first group is all about manufacturing. And the first point, they claim the sequence is not a priority, but I believe it's not a coincidence that the first point is the physical skills on the shop floor. How well can this person work with their hands? How well can they work on the shop floor? And this evaluation is not only for shop floor people, that is used up to plant manager. Everybody in the plant, including the plant manager, gets evaluated first on how well they can work on the shop floor. And it continues like that. The second point is, how well do they influence quality on the shop floor? How well, point number 3, how well do they do Kaizen, continuous improvement? Number 4 is also a surprise, documentation. All the events on the shop floor are documented. And it's written by hand. It's not a computer file, but there are lots of A3-sized papers filled out by hand with detail about the current project or the current state or the latest problems. And everybody is graded how well they fill out those papers. Can you read it well? Is it understandable? Does it explain it well? It's part of the evaluation. Big picture view, leadership, problem solving, cooperation with support, cooperation with management, outside the box thinking. It's all very much towards manufacturing, continuous improvement, and quality. You may know an evaluation form from your company, but I would be surprised if you had many similar points like here at Toyota. Also, performance, teamwork, manners. How do you behave? Do you respect others, including people on a lower level? Self-awareness, health, forward-looking focus, unbiased, wide view, team organization. Not going into too much detail, but the point is, everybody, including the plant manager, is measured on how well they can work with their hands. And again, it's a very strong thing in Japan. Also in Japan, at the end of the day, if you leave, the traditional greeting for leaving is, or kind of farewell greeting is, Gochiso-sama, which means literally, thank you for your hard work, and implying hard physical work, sweaty work, that kind of stuff. Even if you work in an office, at the end of the day, Gochiso-sama for leaving. So manufacturing has a very strong priority, a very strong importance in Japan. Not everything in Japan is great. There are also some not so good sides. Again, I don't want to go into too much detail, but working in Japan is pretty tough. So long working hours are famous, where people work for very long hours. I talked with one waiter in a restaurant who said, well, I work as long as the restaurant is open, which is 13 hours per day, but Sunday we are closed. So every day, 13 hours of work in the restaurant. And then he has 1.5 hours commute to the restaurant and 1.5 hours going back. So including commute, 16 hours of work, that's normal in Japan. And obviously nothing is left for private life. Hobbies or so, it's really, really difficult to have. And I also did some interviews. I interviewed Japanese females which worked abroad and came back to Japan and asked them, how is it working to Japan? And I quote, the Japanese are crazy. It's horrible. It's terrible. And coming from the rest of the world, going back to Japan, the working style is really, really tough. And especially women have lots of pressure. For example, if you work as a receptionist, you're not allowed to wear glasses. You need to wear contacts if you need some kind of glasses or so. And it's expected for women to wear high heels. Now, I haven't worn high heels very often in my life, but I consider them ankle breaker, and wearing them all day long, I think, is not very nice on the feet. But yeah, lots of difficulties of working in Japan. I interviewed around 15 women on how it was to go back to Japan, and 14 of them said it's terrible, it's really, really bad. Only one of them said, well, it's not as bad. But that person came back from Saudi Arabia, so I leave it up to you to judge how this is for the females in the workforce. Japan is trying to work against this, and they have some different events. For example, at one point there was a Premium Friday, a government program, and the idea was the last Friday of the month, you leave already at 3 o'clock. 3 p.m. you go home. Now, I don't know about your working style, but for me, leaving at 3 p.m. on a Friday, that's not Premium Fridays, that's every Friday. That's normal. But in Japan, it's something special. And they tried to start this initiative. Unfortunately, shortly thereafter, there were some other political things going on, and they forgot about it again. So working hours, working conditions in Japan are pretty tough, but they do pay attention to manufacturing. They're really good at manufacturing. Okay, in between, I always have some small pictures of Japan. That one is a flushing dog toilet. The dog does his business here, and then the owner presses the button on the pillar and water comes out and flushes away. Yeah, so a flushing dog toilet, something I've seen only in Japan so far. But so much about Japan in general. Let's have a look at different car makers. And I was able to visit multiple plants of all 7 major car makers: Toyota, Nissan, Honda, Mazda, Mitsubishi, Subaru, Suzuki, sometimes even some subdivisions like Lexus or Gifu Auto Body as part of the Toyota group. Sometimes different areas like Honda Kumamoto makes motorbikes, and Honda and Sayama makes cars. And Mitsubishi Fuso makes truck, Mitsubishi Motors makes car, but I've been able to visit a lot of different car plants in Japan. And I would like to give you an introduction about those plants. First, in terms of size, Japan is one of the major nations in making cars. And here I have you how many cars were produced by the different companies 2016, so it may have shifted slightly and some companies may have merged or split. But we have Toyota, very big, Nissan and Honda, also very big, Suzuki, a little bit medium-sized, Mazda, Mitsubishi, Subaru, and Isuzu trucks, it's also smaller ones, but Japan is a bigger car maker. And I visited a lot of those companies. And one thing I was interested in was the efficiency. How good are those plants? How efficient are those plants? And I wanted to measure this directly. Now, I could have asked for data, but then they probably would not have given me the data in the first place. And if they would have, it's really hard to estimate how much it is true and how it is measured and how it is beautified. So I decided to do some measurement myself. And I did a very quick and dirty measurement when I was walking along an assembly line. I was counting people. And every person I saw, the moment I saw it, I was trying to decide, was that person adding value or doing waste? I'm sure you are familiar with the idea of adding value and waste, in Japanese muda. And adding value is actually really working on the part, working on the product. Waste is waiting, transporting, talking, carrying stuff around, that kind of stuff. So I was counting how many people did I see which were adding value at that moment, and how many people did I see which were not adding value, doing waste at that moment. And that gave me a percentage about what percent of the time is used for value add. And that was very interesting. That one is the overview data of the different plants. And as expected, Toyota is famous, so Toyota had a very high average of adding value. Roughly 70% of the time at Toyota was value adding. And it went up to 80%, like the final assembly line in Suzuki, that was very efficient. Usually final assembly lines are a little bit better than the pre-assembly lines, but Toyota was very good, very efficient, 70% of the time adding value. What surprised me that Nissan was even better. Nissan had like 75% of value add. So of every minute, 75% is added value and only 25% is waste. So I was a bit surprised that Nissan was even more efficient than Toyota in that aspect. Mazda is still pretty good. And then it goes kind of in the normal range where Suzuki, Honda, Mitsubishi, and Subaru. The dotted line is always the average for this group with the different plants, kind of looking at how efficient they are. Sometimes like Kawasaki, the final assembly line in Kawasaki is trucks, and trucks are a little bit more difficult. Kumamoto are motorbikes. Fun is a type of motorbikes they have. But here, efficiencies of around 40%. And now just imagine, I'm sure you're familiar with manufacturing, just imagine if you have a plant where 40% of the time is value add, and another plant where 80% of the time is value add. In effect, you would need half the people to do the same output, to do the same productivity. And that is an amazing difference, an amazing difference in efficiency between those Japanese car plants. And again, I was very surprised that Nissan was much more efficient than, or sorry, not much more, but a bit more efficient than Toyota. So overall, very interesting data. I also did this for a few plants in Germany, and it usually was around 50% for the car makers. So it is comparable with a normal Japanese car maker, but not with the good ones like Toyota or Nissan. Another thing I looked at was working times. Kind of what is their shift pattern? And I knew historically, so shift patterns in most companies, including Toyota, were what I would call work optimized. In Japan, overtime is not something you announce beforehand. Overtime happens when you need it. So at Toyota in the old times, the goal was to make so many cars every shift. If they didn't, well, since the shift was longer. And in old times, they had 2 shifts of 8 hours, which they could extend up to 3 or 4 hours in case they did not meet the demand. So the length of the shift was adapted until the output was on target. And so they had 8-hour shift, 4-hour break, 8-hour shift, 4-hour break. But this means no matter how you do it, some people have the night shift around 4 o'clock. And from the biorhythm, 4 o'clock is terrible. I'm not sure if you've ever worked at 4 o'clock in the morning. It is nasty. It's not good. And workers were very, very unhappy. And Toyota had the problems that its employees were leaving and had a high turnover. So eventually, Toyota shifted the time schedule and they tried to keep the midnight hour, so from 1 o'clock till around 6 o'clock, to keep it free. They do some maintenance or so maybe, but no production. So they're trying to have good shifts from like 6 o'clock till 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock till midnight or 1 o'clock to have good shifts so everybody can catch a good night of sleep. So Subaru does it too. Nissan, Mazda, Mitsubishi are still stuck in the old ways, and some poor people have to work at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, which is really not nice. Some plants were single shift, some plants around the clock. For example, casting. If you do casting, you can't really turn off the oven, so those were around the clock. But interesting in terms of the different schedules they had. I also looked at team size. At Toyota, it's famous for its small team size, and I verified that at Toyota Kyushu and Takaoka, they have usually around 4 to 5 people in a team with 1 team leader. So 1 team leader and 4 to 5 people. Very small teams. Nissan was even smaller with a team size of around 3-ish people. And on the other end, Mitsubishi, Mazda with like 15 people. That is what you expect also in the rest of the world. In many German plants, a team size was like 15, 20, or even 25 people. So 1 team leader was managing 15 to 25 people. But at Toyota, 1 team leader is managing only 3, 4, 5 people. And they use this to solve problems. They use this to stand-ins. If a worker has to go to the toilet, the team leader takes over. If a worker is on holiday, the team leader takes over. If there's a problem, the team leader helps and fixes and tries to solve the problems. With the famous Andon line, it's kind of a small line or sometimes a button. If the worker has problems, he pulls the yellow line, which indicates I'm having a problem and soon I have to stop the line. And if it's not solved, he pulls a red line or presses a red button, and then the line stops. And already when he pulls the yellow line, the team leader comes and tries to help him to get things going and to avoid a stop of the line. So here, very different team sizes for the different companies. If you look at this and compare to the previous slide, Toyota and Nissan had the smallest team size. Mitsubishi, Mazda, Honda had the bigger team size. Here too, Toyota and Nissan had the highest efficiency. And the other companies had less efficiency. So the team size does influence efficiency. And I have included the team leader as part of this efficiency statistics. Everybody working on the shop floor was included, including team leaders. So very interesting that, and a little bit counterintuitive, but smaller team sizes, more team leaders make production more efficient, make it possible to do better improvement. So small temple in Kyoto looks very nice. Unless you go a few steps back, then it looks like this and it's much more crowded. But now let's have a look at the different car makers. Let's start with Toyota, the famous one. And one thing I noticed and what a lot of people told me is that Toyota there is a change in culture. In the old times, Toyota was famous that everybody could raise their voice, and even people on the shop floor at the bottom could say, no, it doesn't work, and kind of give criticism upward. But with the latest CEO, Akio Toyoda, that seems to have changed. According to what I've heard from multiple sources, Akio Toyoda does not like criticism. And if a manager criticizes him, then the career may be ending soon. He may be sent to Hokkaido, which is a cold island in the north. So do not criticize Akio Toyoda if you like your career. And of course, people figured it out very quickly, and nobody is critical anymore, which I think is bad. But then we have the same situation in many Western companies too. Yeah, but Toyota has a culture shift. They're also trying to hire more selfish people, because Japanese are usually very quiet, and at Toyota they're worried that if the quiet Japanese meets an American fast talking, that you just talk to the wall. So the idea is to hire selfish people, but I also think that's not really a good idea for a company to explicitly search or try to hire selfish people. So a lot of change in the culture, and not necessarily good change. There's also change on the shop floor. Toyota is experimenting with what they call a flexible assembly line. Now, flexible, you may know already the term, that you can have a lot size 1 between different products, a blue car, a red car, a green car, it doesn't matter. That's not what they mean. When they say here flexible assembly line, they mean something different. They mean an assembly line which is easy to change. The picture here is a traditional assembly line, model of, sorry. But new assembly line would look like this. They try to get rid of the overhead structure, because the overhead structure is really, really hard to change. They reduce robots and replace it with people, because people are more flexible. And sometimes they even have a robot on wheels. And if the robot has a problem, you just pull the robot back, put in 2 or 3 people, and they do the work of the robot. So they're trying to have a flexible line where they can adjust the line quickly. Example here, pictures from a video where I was able to take. That's the assembly line. It goes here and makes a loop, kind of the U-turn. And the plan was to change it. And with a flexible assembly line, it's very easy because they don't have holes in the ground. It's all a flat surface, and it's all quick and easy to install. So within 1 weekend, they started to assembling, and then shortly thereafter, the assembly line was like this, a little bit longer. And like the turntable, it's all just quickly bolted to the floor, but you don't need to have a hole in the floor. So it's very, very flexible. So that's something new at Toyota. So next, Nissan. Also a very good company, surprisingly even more efficient than Toyota. They do use more robotics. Nissan is much more towards automation, towards robotics than Toyota. And also when walking through the plants, I've seen a lot of plants, but Nissan plants felt distinctively different. They did not feel like a Japanese plant. And I was thinking for a long time, what is different? It's like, is it the smell or what's different? But Nissan felt like a European plant with Asian workers. And I think I finally figured out, for example, in most Japanese plants, not Nissan, but most other car plants, they don't really care how it looks as long as it works. So just screwing together some plastic pipe, using some duct tape, and that kind of stuff is common. But Nissan, maybe you know those famous Bosch Rexroth aluminum profiles, very nice, very good looking, very expensive. And Nissan was pretty much the only plant who uses those profiles, and also it looked much more fancy, spiffy, not cleaner, all of them were clean, but more fancy than the other ones, whereas Toyota, it looked like, well, just quickly put together. And it probably is. As long as it works, they don't care as it looks. But Nissan, it feels more like a European plant. And probably because Nissan is, compared to other Japanese car makers, very, very strongly influenced by Europeans. The guy on the left, William Gorham, he was an American engineer, and he came to Japan. He eventually became a Japanese citizen, and he was kind of the technical heart of Nissan. In the early years of Nissan, he was the driving force of their know-how and their technology, and so very strong Western influence in Nissan right from the start. The guy on the right, Charles Ghosn, I'm still not sure if I pronounce him correctly, also a Lebanese French manager, also very famous. Even so, lately there was a bit of hackmack because Japan was worried about losing control of Nissan towards the French government. So there was some weird accusation about tax fraud and other things, and he was imprisoned, and then he was smuggled out in a suitcase out of Japan, and all kinds of stuff. So weird things going on. But he also gave a strong Western influence on Nissan. One of the plants I visited was Fukushima, and you may have heard Fukushima before, very close to a nuclear power plant, very close to the epicenter of the earthquake. And that's a picture from shortly after the earthquake where the
Christoph, we seem to have lost your sound. Christoph, can you hear? Christoph, we can't hear you.
Christoph, can you hear us? Sorry about this, everyone. We seem to have a technical issue with Christoph. Bear with us 1 second whilst we try to fix this. Sorry about this. Hi, Christoph, can you hear me? Okay, I think we're just trying to fix this. Okay, I think whilst we're just trying to fix it, as we're moving on to the Q&A session soon, if you do have questions for Christoph, please feel free now to type those into the questions box, and we'll see If we can just finish off the last few slides with Christoph whilst you're doing that, thank you. No, I think there's a technical issue, unfortunately, with GoToWebinars. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to fix this just yet.
Christoph, maybe if you come out completely and come back in again, it might work.
So can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes, I can hear
Yes.
and see. Yeah.
Wonderful. Sorry for the technical problem. Now, next thing is the screen. So now you should be able to see my screen.
Yes. Maybe if you just go back 2 or 3 slides, then pick up again. That might be.
Was that one the last one?
Yeah, maybe the one before that.
That one?
Yeah. If you start with this one. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Honda. I visited 2 plants at Honda: the Sayama plants for cars and the Kumamoto plant for motorbikes, and they were very, very different. The Sayama plant was the messiest one of them all. It was dirty, it was dark, it was not ergonomic, it was unclean, it was very little information flow. Both my mentor and I were shocked about how bad this plant was. But then it was already scheduled for closure, so maybe that may be a part of the effect, but that was a really not good plant. Very different from the other Honda plant, the Kumamoto plant, which was very good in terms of ergonomics. For example, when assembling a motorbike, the bikes were height adjustable. If you assemble a wheel, the bike was moving up, so it was on a good height for assembly. If you assembled something on the top, the bike was moving down, so it's also ergonomic. Same with material supplies. They had those hanging shelves on a railing, and this also moved up or down depending on which level was ergonomic. Kind of the shelf was very high if you had to get access to bottom level. It was very low if you have to access the top level. So also ergonomics. And also the assembly line, some parts of it, the bike was pulling a cart with the parts. Kind of the kit for the bike was behind the in a cart. And this assembly line intentionally had a zigzag shape, because then it's less walking distance from the bike to the cart and back. So this zigzag shape made it easier and more efficient and better to walk. So also that was very interesting. Small tea house in Japan, and then Mazda. Famous for its Wankel engines. You see the animation in the top, Wankel engines. They made this for a long time. They stopped it because technologically it's not as good, but for a long time, if you wanted to have a Wankel engine, it's almost automatically had to be a Mazda. And I liked the plant. It was well organized. Information flow could be a tad better, was reasonable ergonomic, and it was, after Nissan and Toyota, the most efficient plant I have seen. But Mazda is famous in Japan for something else. And for that, I have to go back a little bit in history, because 30 years ago, Mazda did almost a textbook a case of how not to deal with a company. It's almost like intentionally they wanted to kill the company, because in around 1990, the idea was to have different brands. I don't mean car models, but car brands. And there was an explosion of different car brands. On top of Mazda, they had Automotive. And every brand had lots of new cars. So 8 new models for Automotive. One brand, 8 cars. Another brand, Unos, 9 models. Affini, 5 new models. M2, 3 new models. Amati as a luxury brand, 2 new models. But then Mazda is a smaller company. They make only around 1 million cars per year. And the development department just couldn't handle developing like 20 different cars for like 5 or 6 different models at the same time. So the development department pretty much collapsed. And Mazda was in really, really big trouble. The company almost went bankrupt during the time because of the, in retrospect, textbook blunder of too many different brands which nobody knew and too many different car models which all had to be developed. And from this, Mazda went pretty much in the opposite direction. And Mazda in Japan is now seen as the leader and the role model with platforms. All Mazda cars are based on one platform called Skyactiv. So no matter which Mazda car you buy, they all have the same platform. Many different car companies do this. In Germany, for example, Volkswagen talks about the so-called modulare Querbaukasten, and I'm not going to translate that, but it's often with mixed success, but Mazda really does it well. And the other car makers are trying to learn from Mazda how to deal with platforms, how to use platforms efficiently to save money. Toyota even bought, I think, 12% shares of Mazda to get a foot in the door, to be the first to learn how Mazda does this platform technology. So
Okay, sorry, I think Christoph's struggling with internet connection. We'll just wait for a couple of minutes and see if we can get him back. Sorry for this.
Okay, I've just heard from Christoph. He's having to reboot his computer, so some technical problems that end. While he does that, again, you could be thinking of any questions you want to pose for that. There's a question here from Stephen, which is about Industry 4.0. I don't know the answer exactly to that, Stephen, but you were asking what's the state of use of Industry 4.0 in Japan. Actually, we were chatting about that before we started the webinar, Christoph, Emma and I, and so I can repeat sort of what he was saying. I think the answer he was giving was that, you know, quite often the Industry 4.0 is a little bit lower in Japan, which might seem strange to some of us. But I suppose he's probably talking from a German perspective where perhaps, you know, Industry 4.0 comes from. But again, he was also suggesting it does vary by the company, as we saw in the presentation, that Toyota, generally speaking, their use of things like Industry 4.0 are actually rather lower because they see the secret in the Toyota production system being very much about the people, whereas in some of the other companies, perhaps like Nissan or Honda, it might be a little bit higher than we see in Toyota. So I think the answer to some degree is it depends, but maybe not as high as in some other cases. So while we're waiting for him to come back, I don't know if there's any questions I might be able to help with. I have some knowledge, probably more knowledge about Toyota than some of the other makers. If there's any questions. If not, I'll just continue with talking. So a few things that came up in the conversation. About the shift patterns, I thought was quite interesting at Toyota that some of you may be aware. Toyota is going through a process through Akio Toyota of rebranding and relaunching some of the Toyota approach, the Toyota production system. And you might be interested to go and look at their website. But there seems to be a greater focus on the people. Particularly about happiness. So they now have a cone, a pyramid, which has the Toyota way in it, sort of things that Jeff Leica talks about. But within that, they actually have this focus on the people. So the not having people up in the middle of the night that Chris was talking about there would probably fit in with that sort of respect for people and focus. Anyway, are you now back with us, Christoph?
I hope so. I apologize for the blue screen of death feared by everybody, and thank you, Peter, for covering the gap.
Okay, well, we just said a few things in the meantime, but please go ahead.
Yeah, we're almost through anyway.
Okay, all right.
Few companies left. Mitsubishi, no longer really a Japanese car company. It's part of it is owned by Renault, and the trucks are now owned by Daimler. And for the Japanese, it really pains them that the 3 diamonds are now in another country's box. It was also the only place where I noticed people frequently rubbing their shoulders, so ergonomics may have been not so good. Yeah. But what they do well is, they're actually a little bit earlier, I showed you the Toyota flexible line, and Mitsubishi is a model for that. As they call it, the tatami conveyor. Tatami is the rice straw mat in the traditional Japanese homes, and they use this kind of this idea a lot and have a very flexible line. It's also the only line I've seen where the car was sometimes rotated 90 degrees, so it's easier to access if you work from the front or from the back. So it's less walking distance coming from the front or from the back. So that's Mitsubishi. They also, just another example of what I said earlier about, they don't care how it looks as long as it works. And you sure know AGVs, automated guided vehicles, so self-driving vehicles. And buying one of those costs usually around 50,000 euros or so, depending on how many features and bells and whistles you want. Mitsubishi also had self-driving vehicles, but they didn't buy them for 50,000 euros. Instead, when a golf course went bankrupt, they bought the second-hand golf carts. And with a little bit of tinkering, installed computers in them, a few lights, and for a total price of around 1,000 euros per car, those golf carts, including seats and everything, pulling around the material trains now, and these are the automated guided vehicles at Mitsubishi, kind of second-hand golf carts. Some Toyota plants do it too, but they just remove everything except for the drivetrain. So the Toyota golf carts are no longer recognizable as golf carts, but the Mitsubishi ones, a person could hop in any time and take control, and if not, the cart goes on its own way. Also, very interesting way of saving money. Again, they don't care how it looks as long as it works. Except Nissan, there it has to look good too. So, 2 car makers left, both of them smaller ones, not too much to tell. They're both okay. Suzuki, it's a very small car maker, and it's in Japan in one kind of unique because it is strongly influenced by Toyota. The headquarters, Toyota City and Suzuki in Hamamatsu, are very close to each other. They have very similar suppliers, and Suzuki learns from the suppliers what Toyota does. And also the current CEO has previously worked for Denso, which is a Toyota group company. So there is a lot of interaction between Suzuki and Toyota. It's probably the company closest to Toyota in Japan in terms of knowledge and understanding. And finally, here an example from Suzuki assembly line. Kind of they bring up the new chairs on one side, but of course some chairs are installed from the other side, and they have this little rail system which uses a gap between 2 cars to just quickly put a chair through, so the chair's on the other side for easy access. You don't have to carry the chair over or under the car, but it's just easy access for the chairs. So Tokyo Big Sight, exhibition place. And finally, Subaru, the smallest of the company, and it's famous for its niche for its 4-wheel drives, and it also uses a flat engine, kind of a German called Boxer motor, instead of kind of a standing or a V shape. They very often have those flat engines, and it is successful in its niche. And the plant itself, it was not bad, it was not outstanding, it was kind of average. But those are the 7 major car makers, and I've visited a lot of those plants. I've visited a lot of other plants too of non-car makers, but that's kind of a quick view at all the experiences and differences of the different car makers, how they behave, and that there are not everything in Japan is Toyota. There are sometimes very different approaches, and Toyota often tries to learn from other car makers, like platform strategy of Mazda or the flexible line from Mitsubishi. So that would conclude my presentation for now. Again, apologies for the interruptions. And Peter has arranged for, or kind of is managing your questions, right?
Yes, thank you. Yes, so if you'd like, if anyone has any questions, please put them into the question section. So we've got a couple of questions, actually both from Stephen, one of which I made an attempt to try and answer on my own, but perhaps you could do it in a more expert way, Christoph. So he was asking about Industry 4.0, which I said we briefly talked about, but maybe you could share your view on where the Japanese car makers are on the use of Industry 4.0.
Different for different car makers. As I said, Nissan is very much for automation. So Nissan has more robots and more what you would call nowadays Industry 4.0 in their plants. Toyota believes more in the value of human work, in the value of the craftsman. And at Toyota they're called Takumi, which would be kind of a grandmaster craftsman.
We've lost your sound again, Christoph. Christoph, we've lost the sound. Okay, well, we're clearly having a few problems there. I'll have another go at the next question myself. We can come back to Christoph if he can come back. So again, Stephen was asking around the high efficiency, was interested in the high efficiency in the Toyota and Nissan area, and was asking how that compares with the German Mittelstadt. I can't really answer the German Mittelstadt part, but something that's along those lines, Stephen, is many years ago when I was in the early days of working at Cardiff University, where working with Dan Jones and others, they conducted a very detailed research program actually looking at the supply chains into the various Japanese manufacturers. And the finding that they had was that they looked at productivity and quality as two main indices of the car suppliers into the car makers. And the interesting thing was that they found that the productivity between the Toyota supply chain and the Nissan supply chain was actually quite similar. So there wasn't a big gap there. So that finding that Christoph said there wasn't too surprising. They also found that the quality gap between the Toyota supply chain and the Honda supply chain was actually quite similar. So again, Honda suppliers were very good at quality, but Toyota was higher in quality than Nissan supply chain and higher in productivity than the Honda supply chain. So the point being that the Nissan, if you like, had the quality and the productivity. We can ask about the Mittelstadt area when he comes back. So there's a question here from Davey. I found, we have Christoph. Are you back? Can you hear?
Yes, the gods of IT are not blessing us today.
No, it's exactly. Right, anyway, you were some way through answering the question about Industry 4.0.
Yes, Toyota believes very strongly in the value in continuous improvement. And to improve things, you need people, Kaizen, and so they believe strongly in people, whereas Industry 4.0 can do a lot of amazing things, but it has the risk of being inflexible. Once you put everything up, it's often very hard to change. You need programmers and debugging and everything. So Toyota is very careful about Industry 4.0. They tried it with one plant, did one plant in Industry 4.0 and decided, nope, it's not worth it. Nissan is much more towards robotics. So different car makers, different approaches to Industry 4.0.
Okay, thank you for that. So a second question, which was, I was just giving some points on, was interested in the span of control and productivity comparison that you made. And how would this compare with the German Mittelstadt approach, or even, you know, the Nissan, Mercedes or BMW, for example?
In most cases, the teams are much bigger. In many German plants, team sizes are like 15, 20, 25 people. The idea is to make it more efficient because you have less overhead and more people actually working. But the problem is that if the people working have a problem, there's nobody there to help them. The team leader is completely busy just managing the schedule and the paperwork, and no time is left for improvement. So Toyota and Nissan want to go a different strategy and want to have this overhead for support, for problem solving, for continuous improvement, which is less common in Western companies. And it's also difficult to change. If a plant manager goes to his boss and says, well, I'm planning to hire like 30 more people, the boss asks, well, what are they going to do? Team leader support. Difficult.
Right. So the key to this productivity is that there's effectively an extra layer. So in Toyota language, you've got a team leader, and we effectively have group leaders, but we have a missing team leader who is this main driver of improvement. Would that be the description?
Yes. The team leader is the first level of leadership. It's not really a leader, but it's the most experienced of the group, and it is a promotion. He gets a bit more money, and the pick one which really knows his stuff and can help and is kind of a experienced hand in this area.
Yes. Yeah, in the UK, we used to call them leading hands, but actually this is something that got leaned out, I suppose, in the 70s and 80s. Ironically, it was actually the way to get productivity, but we got rid of them because we thought they were extra. I don't know, would that be the same in Germany?
It would be the same in Germany, because one problem is that lean is often at odds with cost accounting. And cost accounting, how do you do cost accounting for a team leader? You can calculate very easily what he costs, but you cannot calculate the benefit. And cost accounting, if they can't calculate the benefit, they set the benefit to 0. So it's a person which has cost but no benefit, so he goes. That is often the view, because the benefit, it is there. They do have benefit, but it's really, really hard to quantify the benefit. A factory worker, you can clearly say, well, he can make so and so many parts per hour. That's a benefit. But a team leader, hard to measure.
Yes, exactly. Okay, we have one last question. Perhaps we'll cover this and then finish off for the day. So the question is from Davey, and he's asking about, you know, the comparison that you made. So if you took, for instance, comparing a Nissan car assembly plant with a Toyota car assembly plant, do you think it'd be the same? Because some of them are assembly and some are, you know, what are your views on that?
With Nissan, actually, I haven't seen the car assembly. I've only seen the engine assembly so far. But at Toyota, I also have been to engine assembly. Kind of final is a final assembly and different lines, but it is very different. Nissan feels very different from most other Japanese plants I've been to, as it feels, as I said, more like a Western plant, and it's very different from Toyota. Their approach is different. It also seems to be working. Nissan went the automation approach. Toyota went the human approach. But both seem to be working, but it's a very different plant.
Yeah,
not sure if that answers the question, or
I think so. As well as you're able, it's probably not an easy one to ask. Okay, so I think we've sort of pretty much out of time there, Christoph. So thank you very much for the presentation, and sorry to everyone, we had a few technical issues there, but I think we got there in the end. So thank you for that.
Yes.
So I'll just hand to Emma to conclude for us for today.
Thanks, Peter. And thanks, Christoph, and well rescued. These things definitely happen quite frequently at the moment. So yes, thank you everyone for attending, and thank you very much, Christoph, for a great presentation. So you'll receive a follow-up email from me with the webinar recording, as well as some feedback, which is always useful for us, and an electronic certificate as well. So look out for the upcoming webinars on our website, as well as from Peter's LinkedIn messages as well. So we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, bye now.